Commander Jack Morrison stood at attention as the military transport vehicle pulled up to the base gates. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and the air was thick with tension. Today marked the beginning of what many considered an impossible experiment, integrating a female operative into the most elite SEAL unit in the country. Jack had seen the classified files. Agent Sarah Chen, codenamed Phantom, had an impressive record on paper. Multiple successful missions, expert marksmanship, advanced tactical training. But what the files hadn't mentioned, what nobody had bothered to tell him until yesterday, was that she was confined to a wheelchair. The vehicle door slid open, and Jack watched as a mechanical ramp extended. His jaw tightened involuntarily. Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway, a woman in her late 20s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression that suggested she was already tired of being underestimated. Her wheelchair was sleek, obviously military grade, but, to Jack, it represented everything wrong with this assignment. "Commander Morrison?" Sarah's voice was steady, professional. She maneuvered down the ramp with practiced ease, her movements fluid despite the chair. "Agent Chen reporting for assignment." Jack forced his expression to remain neutral, though inside he was seething. Whoever had approved this transfer was either completely insane or playing some kind of political game. His unit was preparing for one of the most dangerous missions they'd ever undertaken, infiltrating a terrorist compound in hostile territory. Lives depended on every team member being at peak physical condition. "Agent Chen." His greeting was clipped, formal. "Welcome to Forward Operating Base Delta. I trust your journey was comfortable?" Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd heard that tone before, the careful politeness that barely concealed skepticism and frustration. "The journey was fine, Commander. I'm ready to begin integration with the team immediately." Behind Jack, several of his men had gathered to observe the new arrival. He could feel their confusion and concern radiating like heat waves. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, his second in command, stepped forward. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice carefully respectful. "If you don't mind me asking, how exactly are you planning to participate in field operations?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "The same way I've participated in 14 successful missions over the past 3 years, Sergeant. By being better at my job than anyone expects." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Jack studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or defensiveness, but found none. Whatever else she might be, Sarah Chen was clearly not lacking in confidence. "We'll see about that," Jack muttered under his breath, then, louder, "Rodriguez, show Agent Chen to her quarters. We'll begin evaluations at 0800 tomorrow." As Sarah followed Rodriguez across the compound, Jack couldn't help but notice how she navigated the uneven terrain. Her wheelchair seemed to handle obstacles that should have stopped it cold. When they reached a set of stairs leading to the barracks, he expected her to need assistance or an alternative route. Instead, she activated something on her chair's control panel, and the entire device shifted, extending mechanical legs that carried her up the steps like some kind of sci-fi spider. "Interesting modifications," Jack called out, his curiosity overriding his irritation for a moment. Sarah paused and looked back. "Military engineering at its finest, Commander. They don't just give these to anyone." Her smile was enigmatic. "I earned every upgrade." That evening, Jack sat in his office reviewing Sarah's complete file, which had finally arrived through secure channels. What he read made him question everything he thought he knew about this assignment. Sarah Chen hadn't just been injured in the line of duty, she'd been paralyzed while saving an entire village from a terrorist bombing. Despite her injuries, she'd continued her military service, pioneering new techniques for wheelchair-bound operatives. Her mission record was even more impressive than the initial summary had indicated. She specialized in reconnaissance and infiltration, using her condition as camouflage. Enemies never suspected the disabled woman of being a threat until it was too late. She'd rescued hostages, gathered crucial intelligence, and neutralized targets while maintaining perfect operational security. But reading about her accomplishments and actually believing she could function as part of his team were two different things. Jack's SEALs operated in some of the most challenging environments on Earth: dense jungles, urban war zones, mountainous terrain where even able-bodied soldiers struggled to maintain their footing. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Sarah entered, moving silently despite her wheelchair. She'd changed from her travel uniform into standard military fatigues, and Jack noticed she carried herself with the confident bearing of a seasoned combat veteran. "Commander, I wanted to speak with you privately before tomorrow's evaluations begin." "Have a seat," Jack said automatically, then immediately felt awkward about the phrasing. Sarah's lips quirked in a brief smile. "Already sitting, sir." "But, thank you." She positioned herself across from his desk. "I know what you're thinking. What everyone's thinking. How can someone like me possibly contribute to a unit like yours?" Jack leaned back in his chair. "I'll be honest, Agent Chen. I've read your file, and your record is impressive. But my team is preparing for a mission that will test every limit of human endurance and capability. I can't afford to have a weak link." "I'm not asking you to take my word for it," Sarah replied. "I'm asking you to let me prove myself. Give me the same evaluations you'd give any new team member. If I can't meet your standards, I'll request a transfer immediately." There was something in her eyes, a fierce determination that reminded Jack of his best operators. Despite his reservations, he found himself respecting her directness. "All right, Agent Chen. You'll get your chance. But understand this: I won't lower our standards for anyone. If you can't keep up, you're out." "I wouldn't expect anything less, Commander." Sarah turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. My teammates call me Phantom for a reason. By the time enemies realize I'm a threat, it's already too late. Don't make the same mistake they did." After she left, Jack stared at the closed door for a long time. There was something about Sarah Chen that didn't quite fit the profile of a typical operative. She carried herself with an almost supernatural confidence, as if her disability was not a limitation but somehow an advantage. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, perfect weather for what Jack had planned. He designed a grueling evaluation course that would test every aspect of an operator's skills: marksmanship, tactical thinking, physical endurance, and ability to work under pressure. If Sarah wanted to prove herself, she'd have to do it the hard way. The entire team gathered at the training facility at dawn. Jack's unit consisted of 8 elite operators, each one hand-picked for their specialized skills. They'd worked together for years, developing an almost telepathic understanding of each other's capabilities. Introducing any new member would be challenging, but someone with Sarah's limitations seemed impossible. "Listen up," Jack announced as the team assembled. "Agent Chen will be participating in full evaluations today. I want everyone to observe and provide honest feedback. This isn't about making anyone feel good, it's about determining if she can function as part of this unit." Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward with a tablet containing the day's schedule. "We'll start with the obstacle course, move to tactical scenarios, then finish with live-fire exercises. Standard protocol." Sarah had been quiet during the briefing, but now she spoke up. "Commander, I'd like to request permission to modify some of the obstacle course elements." A few of the men exchanged glances. Here it comes, Jack thought. The requests for special accommodations. "What kind of modifications?" he asked carefully. "I'd like to make them more challenging." Sarah's statement caught everyone off guard. "The standard course is designed for bipedal movement. I'd like to add some elements that will test alternative approaches to problem solving." Jack blinked. In all his years of military service, he'd never had anyone ask to make an evaluation harder. "Explain." Sarah's wheelchair whirred as she moved closer to the obstacle course diagram. Traditional obstacles assume traditional solutions. I'd like to demonstrate that sometimes unconventional problems require unconventional thinking. Add some low crawl sections, narrow passages, vertical elements that require creative approaches. The request was so unexpected that Jack found himself agreeing before he'd fully processed it. Fine. Rodriguez, work with Agent Chin to modify the course. But, understand, Chin, you're not just competing against yourself here. You need to prove you can keep up with my men. I understand perfectly, Commander. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. Don't worry about me keeping up. Worry about your men keeping up with me. The modified obstacle course looked like something designed by a sadistic engineer. In addition to the traditional elements, rope climbs, wall scaling, crawling sections, Sarah had added narrow tunnels, low passages, and complex multi-level structures that required creative problem-solving to navigate. Ladies first, Rodriguez said, gesturing toward the starting line. Sarah positioned herself at the beginning of the course. Her wheelchair looked different in the morning light, sleeker, more purposeful. Jack noticed additional equipment mounted on the frame that he hadn't seen the day before. Timer starts, now. What happened next defied everything Jack thought he knew about physical limitations. Sarah's wheelchair transformed before his eyes. Arms extended from hidden compartments, providing additional stability and reach. The wheels adapted to different terrain types, shifting from standard rotation to tracked movement for climbing. When she reached sections too narrow for the chair, she seamlessly transitioned to using her arms, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years perfecting every technique. The rope climb that usually challenged even his strongest men became an exercise in mechanical precision. Sarah's chair deployed climbing gear that allowed her to ascend faster than most people could run. The narrow tunnels that would have stopped a traditional wheelchair became highways for her modified equipment. But it was her problem-solving approach that truly impressed Jack. Where his men relied on brute force and conditioning, Sarah used intelligence and technology. She found paths through obstacles that hadn't occurred to the course designers. Her movements were economical, purposeful, never wasting energy on unnecessary actions. When she crossed the finish line, the timer showed a course record. Not just a good time for someone with her limitations, the fastest time anyone had ever achieved on that course. The training ground fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's controlled breathing. She wasn't even winded. How? Sergeant Rodriguez's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah's chair returned to its normal configuration as she turned to face the assembled team. Years of practice, Sergeant. When you can't rely on legs, you learn to rely on everything else. Brain, arms, technology, creativity. Most people use about 10% of their potential because they're comfortable with familiar solutions. Jack stared at the timer display, then at Sarah. Everything he thought he knew about physical capability had just been turned upside down. This wasn't about accommodation or special treatment. Sarah had just outperformed his best men using methods none of them had even considered. The marksmanship range is next, he said finally, his voice hoarse. If her performance on the obstacle course had been impressive, her shooting skills were supernatural. Sarah's chair provided a stable firing platform that eliminated the minor tremors and breathing variations that affected even expert marksmen. Her accuracy at long range was machine-like in its precision. During tactical scenarios, she demonstrated an understanding of battlefield dynamics that came from real combat experience. While his men were still processing threats and planning responses, Sarah was already 3 moves ahead, anticipating enemy actions and positioning herself accordingly. By the end of the day, Jack's worldview had been fundamentally altered. Sarah Chin wasn't a disabled operative trying to prove she belonged. She was possibly the most capable soldier he'd ever encountered, using unconventional methods to achieve results that conventional thinking couldn't match. As the team gathered for debrief, the atmosphere had completely changed. The skepticism and concern from the morning had been replaced by something approaching awe. "Agent Chen," Jack said formally, though his tone had warmed considerably. "Congratulations. You've passed evaluation with the highest scores in this unit's history." Sarah nodded acknowledgement, but her expression remained serious. "Thank you, Commander. But evaluation is easy compared to real operations. The question isn't whether I can hit targets or navigate obstacles in controlled conditions. The question is whether you trust me to watch your back when everything goes wrong." It was a fair point, and Jack appreciated her honesty. Trust in combat couldn't be earned in a single day of testing, no matter how impressive the performance. "You're right," he admitted. "Trust has to be built over time. But you've earned the right to start building it." As the team dispersed, Jack remained behind with Sarah. The base had grown quiet except for the distant sounds of evening activity. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jack said. Sarah nodded. "The accident that put you in that chair, the file mentions you saved an entire village, but it doesn't give details." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Jack thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of painful memories. "It wasn't an accident, Commander. It was a choice." She stared out at the darkening sky. Intelligence indicated a terrorist cell had planted explosive devices throughout a village in Afghanistan. Civilians were trapped, and conventional bomb disposal would have taken too long. The devices were set to detonate in 30 minutes. She paused, and Jack remained silent, sensing the importance of the story. "I found a way to disarm the network, but it required someone to manually access the central trigger mechanism. The location was structurally unstable. Entering meant accepting that you probably weren't coming out alive. Or at least, not in one piece." Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You went in anyway." 43 civilians, Commander. Including 16 children. The math was simple. Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a routine mission parameter. "I disarmed the network with 7 minutes to spare. The building collapsed as I was exiting. My spinal cord was severed, but everyone in the village survived." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Jack realized he was looking at someone who had made the ultimate sacrifice for others and somehow found a way to continue serving despite the cost. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Don't be." Sarah turned to look at him directly. "That explosion took my legs, but it gave me clarity. I know exactly what I'm capable of, and what I'm willing to sacrifice. That's not a weakness, Commander. In your line of work, it's the most valuable asset anyone can have." As Jack watched her navigate the darkening base, returning to her quarters, he realized that his understanding of strength and capability had been forever changed. Sarah Chin wasn't trying to overcome a disability to become an effective operative. She had transformed her circumstances into a completely new form of military effectiveness. Tomorrow, they would begin mission planning for what intelligence suggested would be their most dangerous assignment yet. But, for the first time since receiving his orders, Jack felt confident they had exactly the right team for the job. The woman who couldn't walk had just shown his elite unit what it really meant to be unstoppable. 3 days after Sarah's evaluation, Commander Jack Morrison stood before a wall of classified photographs and satellite imagery in the base's secure briefing room. The mission they'd been assigned would test every skill his team possessed, and now he was grateful for Sarah's unconventional capabilities. The target was Hassan al-Rashid, a terrorist leader who had orchestrated attacks across 3 continents. Intelligence indicated he was planning something catastrophic, a coordinated strike that could kill thousands. Al-Rashid had gone to ground in a fortified compound deep in the mountains of a hostile nation, surrounded by layers of security that had frustrated conventional military approaches for months. Sarah entered the briefing room early, as had become her habit. Over the past few days, she'd integrated seamlessly with the team, though Jack noticed his men still watched her with a mixture of respect and amazement. Her performance during training exercises had consistently exceeded expectations, but, more importantly, she'd begun to earn their trust through countless small demonstrations of competence and reliability. "Morning, Commander," she said, positioning herself where she could see all the intelligence displays. "The satellite imagery came in overnight?" Jack nodded. "Fresh thermal scans from yesterday. The situation's more complicated than we initially thought." As the rest of the team assembled, Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, Parker, Chen, Nakamura, and Foster, Jack activated the main display screen. The compound appeared to be built into the mountainside itself, taking advantage of natural cave systems and defensive positions. "Gentlemen and lady," Jack began, "meet Fortress Alpha. Al-Rashid has turned this location into the most heavily defended terrorist stronghold intelligence has ever documented." The images showed multiple perimeter defenses, guard towers, and what appeared to be a complex tunnel system. But what made the target particularly challenging was its location, accessible only by narrow mountain paths that would expose any attacking force to devastating crossfire. Sergeant Rodriguez leaned forward. "Conventional assault would be suicide, sir. They'd see us coming from miles away." "Agreed," Jack replied. "Which is why conventional assault isn't an option. This mission requires finesse, stealth, and capabilities our enemies won't expect." Sarah studied the imagery with intense concentration. "Commander, may I see the geological surveys of the area?" Jack pulled up additional files. "The mountain is honeycombed with natural caves. Most are unstable, but some connect to the compound's tunnel system. There," Sarah pointed to a specific area on the map. "This cave entrance is 3 kilometers from the main compound, hidden from their observation posts. If the surveys are accurate, this passage should connect to their lower level." Williams, the team's explosives expert, shook his head. "That passage is barely 4 feet high in places. Even crawling, most of us would get stuck." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Most of you, yes. But size restrictions that would stop a traditional infiltration team don't apply to me." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Jack studied the cave system again, seeing it with new understanding. What had seemed like an impossible infiltration route suddenly became viable if you had someone who could navigate spaces too small for conventional operatives. "You're suggesting a solo infiltration?" Rodriguez asked. "Not solo," Sarah corrected. "I'm suggesting an approach the enemy won't anticipate. While the main team creates a diversion at the primary access point, I infiltrate through the cave system and neutralize their internal defenses from within." Thompson, their communications specialist, pulled up building schematics. "According to intelligence, they've got state-of-the-art security systems. Motion detectors, thermal imaging, pressure plates in the floors." Sarah's smile was sharp. "Motion detectors calibrated for walking humans don't register wheelchair movement patterns. Thermal imaging focuses on head and torso heat signatures. Mine are at different levels than they're programmed to detect. Pressure plates are designed for foot impact distribution." Jack felt pieces clicking into place. Sarah wasn't just proposing to infiltrate the compound despite her wheelchair, she was planning to use it as camouflage. Her different movement patterns and heat signature would allow her to bypass security systems designed to stop traditional intruders. "What about the target himself?" Foster asked. "Al-Rashid is reportedly never alone, always surrounded by bodyguards." "That's where psychology becomes important," Sarah replied. "Terrorists like Al-Rashid build their identity around being feared and respected. They surround themselves with intimidating men with obvious weapons. What they don't fear is a disabled woman who appears helpless." The briefing room was completely quiet except for the hum of electronic equipment. Jack could see his team processing the radical nature of Sarah's proposed approach. Everything about it violated conventional tactical thinking, yet it made perfect sense. There's something else, Jack said, activating another display. Intelligence suggests Al-Rashid isn't just planning an attack, he's planning to auction the attack plans to the highest bidder among terrorist organizations worldwide. If successful, multiple groups could execute coordinated strikes simultaneously. The stakes couldn't be higher. Failure would mean not just Al-Rashid's escape, but the potential for catastrophic attacks across the globe. Nakamura, their medic and psychological operations specialist, studied Sarah thoughtfully. The infiltration plan is brilliant, but what's your extraction strategy? Getting in undetected is one thing, but getting out after neutralizing the target is another. Sarah's expression grew serious. Extraction depends on timing and the main team's diversion. If everything goes according to plan, I'll have a window when their security focus shifts to the external threat. If not. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood that solo infiltration missions sometimes became one-way trips. Jack made a decision that went against every instinct developed over 20 years of military service. We're going to do this. Sarah, you'll have point on infiltration planning. Rodriguez, coordinate the diversion team. I want multiple contingencies for every phase of this operation. Over the next several hours, the team developed one of the most unconventional mission plans in special operations history. Sarah would enter the cave system at night, using specialized equipment to navigate the narrow passages. Her wheelchair had been further modified with silent operation mode and climbing capabilities specifically for this mission. The main team would begin their diversion exactly 48 minutes after Sarah's infiltration commenced, enough time for her to reach the compound's interior but not so long that her presence might be discovered through routine security checks. As the briefing concluded, Jack realized how much his perspective on military capability had changed. 3 weeks ago, the idea of sending a wheelchair-bound operative on a solo infiltration mission would have seemed insane. Now it appeared to be their best chance of success. After the team dispersed to begin detailed preparations, Sarah remained behind with Jack. The intelligence photos still glowed on the wall displays, showing the fortress that had defied conventional assault for months. Second thoughts, Commander, she asked. Jack considered the question seriously. About the mission? No. Your approach is sound, and it's probably our only real option. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about sending you in alone. I've been alone before, Sarah replied quietly. In Afghanistan, in Syria, in half a dozen other places where conventional tactics weren't sufficient. Being alone doesn't scare me anymore. What does scare you? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Failure. Knowing that thousands of innocent people might die because I wasn't good enough, fast enough, smart enough. That's what keeps me awake at night. Jack understood that feeling. It was the burden every military leader carried, the weight of consequences that extended far beyond personal survival. Your team trusts you now, Sarah continued. I can see it in how they interact with me. But trust in training isn't the same as trust in combat. Tomorrow night, when everything goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, that's when we'll really find out if this unit can function together. She was right, and Jack appreciated her honesty. Combat had a way of stripping away everything superficial, revealing the true nature of people and relationships. For what it's worth, Jack said, I've seen enough to know that you're not the weak link I was worried about. If anything, you might be the strongest member of this team. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Thank you, Commander. That means more than you know. As evening approached, the base took on the focused energy that preceded major operations. Equipment was checked and rechecked, communications protocols were rehearsed, and contingency plans were refined down to the smallest detail. Sarah spent hours in the equipment bay with the technical team, making final adjustments to her wheelchair's modification systems. Jack watched as engineers made delicate calibrations to sensors, silent operation modules, and climbing mechanisms that would mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The cave navigation system is based on ground-penetrating radar, the lead technician explained. It'll map passages in real time and alert you to structural instabilities. Battery life is 18 hours with normal use, 12 hours with intensive climbing mode engaged. Sarah tested each system methodically, her movements precise and economical. Jack noticed she approached equipment checks with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to everything else. Weapons loadout? Rodriguez asked, reviewing the mission checklist. Modified configurations for close quarters work, Sarah replied. Suppressed sidearms, non-lethal options for situations requiring discretion, and emergency signaling devices. The key is mobility and silence rather than firepower. That evening, the team gathered for their final briefing and what might be their last meal together. The atmosphere was professional but tinged with the subdued energy that preceded dangerous operations. Williams raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. To unconventional solutions to impossible problems. The others joined in, and Jack noticed how naturally Sarah had become part of the group. The awkwardness and uncertainty from her first day had been replaced by genuine mutual respect. After dinner, Jack found himself walking the base perimeter, a habit he'd developed before major operations. The night air was cool and clear, with stars visible despite the security lighting. Sarah was already there, having apparently had the same idea. "Trouble sleeping?" she asked. "Always, before missions like this. Too many variables to consider, too many things that could go wrong." Jack joined her at the fence line overlooking the valley below. "What about you? Any regrets about taking this assignment?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Commander, can I tell you something that's not in my official file?" Jack nodded. "After my injury, after I realized my legs weren't coming back, I went through a period where I thought my military career was over. I'd defined myself as a soldier, and, suddenly, I didn't fit anyone's definition of what a soldier should be." Her voice was steady, but Jack could hear the old pain beneath the words. "What changed?" "I realized that being a soldier isn't about the body you're given, it's about what you choose to do with whatever capabilities you have. My wheelchair didn't make me less of a soldier. It made me a different kind of soldier, with different strengths and different ways of solving problems." She gestured toward the mountains where their target waited. "Tomorrow night, I'm not going in there as a disabled person trying to prove herself. I'm going in as a specialized operative using unique capabilities to accomplish a mission that conventional approaches can't handle." Jack felt a profound shift in his understanding. Sarah hadn't overcome her limitations to become an effective soldier, she had transformed her circumstances into an entirely new form of military capability. "The team is lucky to have you," he said simply. "We're lucky to have each other," Sarah corrected. "Good soldiers trust their equipment, their training, and their intelligence. Great soldiers trust their teammates. Tomorrow night, we find out what kind of soldiers we really are." As they stood in comfortable silence, Jack realized that his concerns about Sarah's integration had been completely misplaced. The question wasn't whether she could function as part of his team, it was whether his team could rise to the level of excellence she represented. 24 hours later, they would discover the answer in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. But, tonight, watching the woman who had redefined his understanding of strength and capability, Jack felt more confident about their chances than he had since receiving the mission orders. The fortress in the mountains had defeated every conventional assault attempted against it. Tomorrow, they would show Hassan al-Rashid and his followers what unconventional really meant. The woman who couldn't walk was about to walk through walls that had stopped entire armies. The helicopter dropped Sarachin 3 kilometers from the target at exactly 2,100 hours. The night was moonless, perfect for infiltration but challenging for navigation through treacherous mountain terrain. As the aircraft disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the whisper of rotors fading into distant silence, Sarah found herself alone in hostile territory with nothing but her modified wheelchair and 2 decades of training. The cave entrance was exactly where intelligence had indicated, a narrow opening in the rock face, barely visible even with night vision equipment. Sarah approached carefully, scanning for any signs of enemy surveillance. Her wheelchair's sensors detected no electronic signatures, no heat sources, no indication that al-Rashid's forces had discovered this potential infiltration route. She activated the silent operation mode, and her chair's mechanical sounds faded to barely audible whispers. The modification had cost the engineering team 6 months of development, creating systems that could function without the typical hydraulic and motor noise that would echo through cave passages like gunshots. The cave mouth was even smaller than the satellite imagery had suggested. Sarah's chair transformed into climbing configuration, extending mechanical arms and shifting its center of gravity for navigating vertical surfaces. As she began the descent into darkness, she thought about her team, now moving into position for their diversionary assault. Commander Morrison's plan was elegant in its complexity. While Sarah infiltrated through the cave system, his team would begin what appeared to be a conventional assault on the compound's main entrance. The attack would be loud, obvious, and designed to draw every defender to the primary defensive positions. If everything went according to plan, Sarah would have access to the compound's interior while every enemy soldier was focused on the external threat. If everything went wrong, she would be trapped alone inside a terrorist stronghold with no backup and no extraction plan. The cave passage narrowed almost immediately, requiring Sarah to navigate through spaces that would have been impossible for any traditional operative. Her chair's sensors mapped the route ahead, identifying stable surfaces and warning of potential structural weaknesses. The limestone walls were smooth from centuries of water erosion, providing good purchase for her climbing mechanisms but creating treacherous conditions for anyone depending on foot traction. 30 minutes into the infiltration, Sarah encountered her first serious obstacle. The passage ahead dropped into a vertical shaft that descended beyond the range of her sensors. According to the geological surveys, this should connect to the horizontal tunnel system that led to the compound, but the intelligence could have been wrong. Sarah paused at the edge of the drop, considering her options. The mission timeline didn't allow for extensive route finding. In 18 minutes, Morrison's team would begin their assault, expecting her to be in position to neutralize the compound's internal defenses. If she couldn't make the connection to the main tunnel system, the entire operation would collapse. She activated her chair's climbing mode to its maximum extension. Mechanical arms unfolded from hidden compartments, each equipped with specialized gripping surfaces designed for rocky terrain. The descent began slowly, her chair's systems calculating weight distribution and anchor points with machine-like precision. The shaft was deeper than expected, nearly 40 feet of vertical drop through complete darkness. Sarah's world narrowed to the immediate feedback from her equipment, the slight vibrations that indicated secure anchor points, the whisper of mechanical systems adjusting to maintain balance, the soft ping of sonar mapping the space below. When her sensors finally detected the bottom of the shaft, Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief. The horizontal passage continued ahead, wider than the entrance route and bearing the artificial regularity that suggested human modification. According to intelligence, this tunnel had been excavated by al-Rashid's forces to connect the natural cave system to their compound's lower levels. The terrorist leader had unknowingly created the perfect infiltration route for someone with Sarah's capabilities. Moving through the modified tunnel, Sarah began encountering signs of recent human activity. Fresh tool marks on the walls, electrical cables running along the ceiling, and, most concerning, the subtle electronic signatures that indicated surveillance equipment. She activated her chair's stealth mode, a sophisticated system that masked both her thermal signature and electromagnetic emissions. The technology was experimental, developed specifically for her unique requirements, and this would be its first real-world test. A motion sensor array came into view ahead, positioned to monitor the tunnel approach. Sarah studied the device carefully through her night vision scope. Standard commercial security equipment, probably motion-activated recording systems rather than real-time monitoring. The sensors were positioned at head height for standing humans, with coverage patterns designed for traditional bipedal movement. Sarah's approach from a seated position, with her modified heat signature and electromagnetic masking, should be invisible to the system. Should be. There was only one way to find out. She moved forward slowly, her chair systems maintaining absolute silence. The motion sensor remained inactive as she passed directly beneath it. Her unconventional profile had made her effectively invisible to security systems designed for conventional infiltrators. The tunnel system opened into a wider chamber, clearly artificial and recent. Overhead lighting suggested regular use, and Sarah could hear distant sounds of human activity. According to the building schematics, this chamber should connect to the compound's basement level through a concealed entrance. Sarah checked her mission timer. 12 minutes until the diversionary assault began. She needed to locate the entrance to the main compound and position herself to neutralize key defensive systems when Morrison's team began their attack. The concealed entrance was exactly where intelligence had indicated, behind a false wall panel that matched the surrounding stone. Sarah's chair extended a mechanical probe that located the hidden latch mechanism. The panel swung open silently, revealing a service corridor lined with electrical and communications equipment. She was inside Al-Rashid's fortress. The corridor was empty, but Sarah could hear voices and movement from the levels above. Her infiltration had brought her to the compound's technical infrastructure area, exactly where she needed to be to cause maximum disruption to their defensive capabilities. Sarah began systematically identifying key systems. The main communications hub was housed in a reinforced room 50 meters ahead. The electrical distribution center controlled power to the entire compound. Most importantly, the security system's central processing unit was located in a server room adjacent to the communications center. With 8 minutes remaining until the assault began, Sarah positioned herself at the communications hub. Her chair's equipment included sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, systems that could intercept, jam, or redirect communications traffic. When the attack began, her first priority would be to prevent Al-Rashid's forces from coordinating their defense. She also identified the compound's backup power systems. If the diversionary assault succeeded in cutting main power, these systems would maintain lighting and security functions. Sarah planted small explosive charges on key components, configured for remote detonation when needed. The building schematics showed Al-Rashid's personal quarters on the 3rd floor, accessible through a service elevator that connected to the basement level. Sarah positioned herself near the elevator, checking her weapons and reviewing the timeline for final phase of the mission. 4 minutes until assault commencement. Sarah activated her communication system for a final check with Morrison's team. The signal was encrypted and burst transmitted to avoid detection. Phantom in position, she whispered into her throat microphone. All primary objectives accessible. Ready for Phase 2 initiation. Morrison's reply came back immediately. Copy, Phantom. Assault commences in 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Execute according to timeline. Sarah settled into position and began her final equipment check. Her weapons were loaded and readily accessible. Her chair systems were operating at peak efficiency. The explosive charges were armed and ready for remote detonation. Most importantly, she had identified multiple escape routes through the service corridors and elevator systems. In 90 seconds, the compound would erupt into chaos as Morrison's team began their assault. In the confusion that followed, Sarah would have a narrow window to locate and neutralize Hassan al-Rashid before his security forces could reorganize. She thought briefly about the village in Afghanistan where her legs had been crushed, saving 43 civilians. Tonight, thousands more lives hung in the balance. Al-Rashid's planned attacks would target innocent people across 3 continents. Schools, hospitals, public gatherings, anywhere maximum casualties could be inflicted. Sarah had accepted long ago that some missions required soldiers to sacrifice everything for the greater good. Tonight might be one of those missions. But she was ready. She had been ready since the moment she chose to enter that collapsing building in Afghanistan. The seconds ticked by in absolute silence. Sarah controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and entered the mental state that had carried her through countless dangerous operations. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Doubt was a weakness that could cost lives. 30 seconds to assault initiation. Sarah heard the sound of vehicles approaching the compound's main entrance. Morrison's team, right on schedule. The diversionary assault would be spectacular, designed to draw every defender away from the interior and focus all attention on repelling what appeared to be a conventional attack. 15 seconds. Sarah's fingers found the controls for the communications jamming system. When the assault began, her first action would be to blind al-Rashid's forces, preventing them from coordinating their response. 10 seconds. Through the building's structure, Sarah could hear increased activity on the upper levels. Guards moving to defensive positions, officers shouting orders, the metallic sounds of weapons being readied. 5 seconds. Sarah closed her eyes and visualized the next phase of the mission. Up the service elevator to the 3rd floor. Navigate the corridor to al-Rashid's quarters. Neutralize security personnel with minimal noise. Locate and capture the target. 3 seconds. Everything she had trained for, everything she had sacrificed, led to this moment. 1 second. The compound erupted in chaos. Explosions rocked the main entrance as Morrison's team began their assault. Emergency alarms blared throughout the building. Sarah could hear dozens of footsteps above as defenders rushed to repel the attack. She activated the communications jamming system. Throughout the compound, radios fell silent and coordination became impossible. In the darkness and confusion, al-Rashid's forces would be fighting blind. Sarah moved to the service elevator, her chair's systems operating in complete silence despite the chaos surrounding her. The elevator responded to her electronic override codes, carrying her smoothly to the 3rd floor while the battle raged below. The corridor was empty, every defender having rushed to the main defensive positions. Sarah's infiltration had been perfectly timed. She had access to the compound's interior while every enemy soldier was occupied with Morrison's assault. Al-Rashid's quarters were at the end of the corridor, behind a reinforced door that would have stopped conventional infiltrators. Sarah's chair deployed specialized equipment that made quick work of the electronic locks. The door swung open to reveal Hassan al-Rashid himself, standing at a window and watching the battle below. He was alone, his bodyguards having joined the fight against Morrison's team. "Good evening, Mr. al-Rashid," Sarah said quietly. The terrorist leader spun around, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of a woman in a wheelchair in his private quarters. For a moment, he seemed unable to process what he was seeing. How did you?" he stammered. "Hassan al-Rashid, you're under arrest for crimes against humanity," Sarah continued, her voice steady and professional. "You have the right to remain silent, though in your case, I'd recommend using it." Al-Rashid's shock quickly transformed into rage. "You think one disabled woman can stop what I've set in motion? Even if you kill me, my plans will proceed. Thousands will die, and there's nothing you can do to prevent it." "Actually," Sarah replied, activating a recording device, "there's quite a lot I can do. Starting with getting you to confess the details of your planned attacks." The realization dawned in al-Rashid's eyes. This wasn't an assassination mission, it was a capture operation. Sarah needed him alive and talking. "I'll never tell you anything," he snarled, reaching for a weapon concealed behind his desk. Sarah's response was lightning fast. A non-lethal electrical discharge from her chair's defensive systems dropped al-Rashid to his knees, muscles spasming from the neural disruption. "Mr. al-Rashid," Sarah said calmly, "you're going to tell me everything about your planned attacks. The locations, the timing, the organizations involved. You're going to help me save the thousands of innocent lives you were planning to take." Outside, the battle continued to rage as Morrison's team maintained their diversionary assault. But, inside the compound's heart, in the terrorist leader's private sanctuary, the real mission was just beginning. The woman who couldn't walk had just walked through every defense Hassan al-Rashid had ever conceived. Now she was going to walk him through the process of undoing every evil plan he had ever made. Phase 3 of the operation was about to commence, and Sarah Chen was exactly where she needed to be. Hassan al-Rashid struggled to his knees, his body still trembling from the electrical discharge. The sound of battle echoed through the compound as Commander Morrison's team maintained their diversionary assault, but, inside the terrorist leader's private quarters, an entirely different kind of warfare was about to begin. Sarah Chen positioned herself between al-Rashid and the window, cutting off his view of the external battle and forcing his attention entirely on her. She had perhaps 20 minutes before the diversion would need to conclude, and, in that time, she needed to extract information that could prevent catastrophic attacks across 3 continents. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," al-Rashid gasped, his voice hoarse from the neural disruption. "I am Hassan al-Rashid. Nations fear my name. Armies have fallen before my strategies. You think one woman can undo years of planning?" Sarah's expression remained calm, almost conversational. "Mr. al-Rashid, let me tell you what I think. I think you're a man who has spent so long being feared and respected that you've forgotten what real power looks like." She activated a small device on her chair's console. This is a neural interface scanner. It reads micro-expressions, stress responses, and involuntary muscle reactions. In simple terms, it's a very sophisticated lie detector. Every word you speak, every reaction you have, gets recorded and analyzed. Al-Rashid's eyes darted toward the device, then back to Sarah's face. "Torture is forbidden by your Geneva Conventions. Whatever nation you represent will be held accountable for." "I'm not going to torture you," Sarah interrupted. "Torture is inefficient and unreliable. People will say anything to make pain stop, whether it's true or not. What I'm going to do is much more effective." She pulled up a holographic display that showed detailed intelligence files. Al-Rashid's face appeared on the screen, along with photographs of his known associates, safe houses, and financial networks. "We know about the London cell," Sarah said casually, watching his micro-expressions. "The device they're planning to detonate in the financial district. We know about the synchronized attacks planned for New York, Paris, and Tokyo. We know about the auction you're conducting, selling operational details to the highest bidders." With each revelation, Al-Rashid's confident expression cracked a little further. The neural scanner registered spikes in stress response that confirmed the accuracy of the intelligence. "What we don't know," Sarah continued, "are the specific details. Exact locations, timing, trigger mechanisms. That's what you're going to provide." Al-Rashid's laugh was bitter. "You expect me to betray everything I've worked for? To save the lives of people I consider enemies? You understand nothing about dedication to a cause." "Actually," Sarah replied, "I understand dedication better than you might think." She activated another display, showing footage from Afghanistan. The village where she had lost her legs was clearly visible, along with the aftermath of the terrorist attack she had prevented. 3 years ago, I willingly entered a collapsing building to prevent 43 innocent people from being murdered by explosives very similar to the ones your organization uses. I knew the building would come down. I knew I probably wouldn't survive intact. I went in anyway because saving those lives was more important than my personal well-being." The scanner showed Al-Rashid's confusion. This wasn't the interrogation approach he had expected or prepared for. "The difference between us, Mr. Al-Rashid, is that my sacrifices were made to save lives. Your sacrifices have been made to take them. You talk about dedication to a cause, but your cause is death and destruction. My cause is protecting innocent people from men like you." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "So yes, I expect you to provide the information I need. Not because I'm going to hurt you, but because I'm going to show you exactly what your dedicated followers are really like when their dedication is tested. She activated a new display showing surveillance footage from multiple locations. Al-Rashid's eyes widened as he recognized the images. These were his safe houses, his operational centers, his most trusted lieutenants. While we've been talking, intelligence teams have been simultaneously raiding 17 of your facilities across 4 countries. Your entire network is being dismantled as we speak. The footage showed his associates being arrested, operational plans being confiscated, and weapons caches being secured. Most tellingly, it showed several of his most trusted commanders attempting to flee rather than fight. Your London cell leader surrendered without firing a shot, Sarah continued dispassionately. He provided full details of the financial district operation in exchange for protection from prosecution. Your Paris coordinator was captured trying to board a flight to Morocco with a suitcase full of cash and new identity documents. Al-Rashid's face had gone pale. The neural scanner registered cascading psychological shock as he watched his life's work being systematically destroyed. Your Tokyo operative actually called our intelligence services himself, Sarah added. Apparently, he decided that cooperation was preferable to spending the rest of his life in a maximum security prison. The terrorist leader stared at the displays in stunned silence. Everything he had believed about loyalty and dedication was crumbling before his eyes. But, here's the most interesting part, Sarah said, activating one final display. Your son, Khalil al-Rashid, the one you thought was safely hidden in Switzerland? He's been working with international intelligence for 6 months. Every plan you shared with him, every operational detail you trusted him with, has been passed along to prevent the attacks. This revelation hit al-Rashid like a physical blow. He slumped against the wall, the scanner registering complete psychological collapse. That's impossible, he whispered. Khalil would never, he believes in our cause. Your son believes in staying alive, Sarah replied. When international intelligence showed him evidence of your planned attacks on schools and hospitals, when they explained that thousands of children would die, he chose to help stop you. That's what real dedication looks like. The battle sounds outside were beginning to diminish. Morrison's team would need to begin extraction soon, which meant Sarah's window for obtaining critical intelligence was closing rapidly. Now, Mr. Al-Rashid, you have a choice. You can maintain your silence and watch as your remaining operational cells proceed with attacks that will now certainly fail, resulting in the deaths of your followers and the imprisonment of anyone who survives. Or you can provide the details needed to safely dismantle the remaining devices and spare the lives of your own people. Al-Rashid looked up at her with eyes that seemed to have aged decades in the past few minutes. You would spare my followers? The ones who surrender and cooperate, yes. We're not interested in revenge, Mr. Al-Rashid. We're interested in preventing civilian casualties and ensuring this network can never operate again. The scanner showed his internal conflict. Years of conditioning and fanatical dedication warring against the crushing reality that his cause was lost and his continued silence would only result in more death. The London device, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. It's in the basement of the Clearwater building on Lombard Street. Timer activation, set for 0800 local time tomorrow morning. Sarah immediately transmitted the information to intelligence teams. Within seconds, she received confirmation that bomb disposal units were en route to the location. Paris, she prompted gently. Metro station at Charles de Gaulle. Magnetic attachment under the eastbound platform. Same timer configuration. Again, Sarah transmitted the details and received confirmation of response teams being deployed. Tokyo? Shibuya District. The device it's in a school. Al-Rashid's voice broke. I never wanted, children were never supposed to be the primary targets. Sarah felt a cold fury at the confirmation that a school had been targeted, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Which school, Mr. Al-Rashid? Sakura Elementary. third floor, inside the wall cavity behind the library. But, you have to understand, the device wasn't meant for when children would be present. The timing was calculated for weekend activation when the building would be empty. The timer settings? Manual trigger only. Remote activation through cellular signal. Sarah transmitted the final location and received urgent confirmation that both Japanese authorities and bomb disposal experts were being notified immediately. "Thank you," she said simply. "You've just saved thousands of lives." Al-Rashid stared at his hands. "My entire life's work. Everything I believed in. Gone." "Your life's work was planning to murder innocent people," Sarah replied. "What's gone is your ability to cause harm. What remains is the possibility that you can help repair some of the damage you've caused." The sound of helicopter rotors became audible outside. Morrison's team was beginning their extraction, which meant Sarah needed to conclude her mission immediately. "There's one more thing, Mr. Al-Rashid. Intelligence suggests you've developed new recruitment techniques specifically targeting vulnerable individuals through social media manipulation. We need those operational details to prevent other terrorist organizations from implementing similar strategies." Al-Rashid looked up at her with something approaching respect. "You truly are remarkable. In another life, under different circumstances, someone with your capabilities could have been." He paused, seeming to recognize the absurdity of the statement. "Could have been what, Mr. Al-Rashid?" "Could have been unstoppable," he finished quietly. Sarah's smile was cold as winter steel. "I am unstoppable, Mr. Al-Rashid. That's why you're in custody and your network is in ruins. That's why thousands of innocent people will wake up tomorrow morning alive and safe instead of injured or dead." She activated her communication system. "Morrison, this is Phantom. Primary objective complete. Package secured and intelligence obtained. Ready for extraction." Morrison's voice crackled back through the static. "Copy, Phantom. Extraction team en route to your position. ETA 3 minutes." Al-Rashid listened to the exchange with growing understanding. "You planned this entire operation around capabilities no one would expect. My security was designed to stop traditional soldiers, not someone like me," Sarah finished. "Your mistake, Mr. Al-Rashid, was the same mistake everyone makes. You assumed that different meant weaker. You built defenses against threats you understood while remaining completely vulnerable to approaches you couldn't imagine." The sound of footsteps in the corridor indicated Morrison's team had reached the compound's interior. The diversionary assault had succeeded perfectly, drawing every defender away from the critical areas while Sarah completed her mission. "Phantom, we're outside the door," came Rodriguez's voice through her earpiece. "Enter," Sarah called back. The door opened to admit Morrison, Rodriguez, and 2 other team members. They moved with the efficient precision of soldiers who had just completed a successful operation, but their expressions showed amazement at finding Sarah and Al-Rashid in conversation rather than combat. "Status report?" Morrison asked. "Target secured and cooperative," Sarah replied. "Critical intelligence obtained and transmitted. All immediate threats neutralized." Morrison looked at Al-Rashid, who sat slumped against the wall in obvious psychological defeat. "How did you?" "I asked nicely," Sarah said with a slight smile. "It turns out that when you show someone the complete futility of their position and offer them a chance to minimize additional bloodshed, most people choose cooperation over pointless defiance." Al-Rashid looked up at Morrison. "Commander, you have a remarkable operative. In 30 years of conflict, I have never encountered anyone with her combination of strategic thinking and psychological insight." Morrison's expression was unreadable. Agent Chin has that effect on people. As the extraction team secured Al-Rashid for transport, Sarah began shutting down her specialized equipment. The mission had been completed with unprecedented success, the target captured alive, critical intelligence obtained, and immediate threats neutralized without a single casualty among the assault team. "Phantom," Morrison said privately as they prepared to leave, "that was the most professional interrogation I've ever witnessed." "How did you get him to cooperate so quickly?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "Commander, people like al-Rashid build their identities around being feared and respected through violence. When you strip away the violence and show them that their followers are ordinary people motivated by ordinary human needs like survival and protecting their families, the entire psychological structure collapses." She gestured toward al-Rashid, who was being helped to his feet by Rodriguez. "He spent years believing he was leading a holy war. What he was really doing was exploiting desperate people and training them to murder innocents." When confronted with that reality, most people choose to stop the violence rather than continue it. As they began moving toward the extraction point, Morrison realized that he had witnessed something unprecedented. Sarah hadn't just captured a high-value target, she had demonstrated a completely new approach to counterterrorism operations. The woman who couldn't walk had just walked Hassan al-Rashid through the process of dismantling his entire network. More importantly, she had done it without firing a shot or harming a single person. As the helicopter lifted off from the compound, carrying them toward safety and al-Rashid toward justice, Morrison looked at Sarah with newfound understanding of what true strength really meant. The mission was complete, but the real story was just beginning. 3 months after the al-Rashid operation, Commander Jack Morrison stood in the Pentagon briefing room facing a panel of senior military officials, intelligence directors, and national security advisors. The mission had become a case study in unconventional warfare, and Sarah Chin had become something of a legend within the special operations community. But today's briefing wasn't about celebrating past success. It was about fundamentally changing how the military thought about capability, inclusion, and the future of special operations. "Gentlemen," Imam Morrison began, addressing the distinguished panel, 3 months ago, Agent Sarah Chin accomplished what conventional military wisdom said was impossible. She single-handedly infiltrated the most heavily defended terrorist stronghold in recent history, captured Hassan al-Rashid alive, and extracted intelligence that prevented coordinated attacks across 3 continents. General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking officer present, leaned forward. "Commander Morrison, we've all read the after-action reports. Agent Chen's performance was remarkable by any standard. But we're here to discuss broader implications for military policy and recruitment." Morrison activated a presentation display. "Ma'am, with respect, I don't think we truly understand the broader implications yet. Sarah's success wasn't despite her disability, it was because of how she transformed her circumstances into a unique operational advantage." The slides showed detailed analysis of Sarah's infiltration route, her psychological approach to interrogation, and the technological innovations that had made the mission possible. "Traditional military thinking focuses on overcoming limitations," Morrison continued. "What Sarah demonstrated is something entirely different, leveraging limitations to create capabilities that conventional operators simply cannot match." Admiral Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, raised his hand. "Commander, are you suggesting we should actively recruit disabled personnel for special operations?" "I'm suggesting we stop thinking about disability as a limitation and start thinking about different physical configurations as potential operational advantages," Morrison replied. Sarah's wheelchair gave her access to spaces conventional operators couldn't enter. Her different thermal signature made her invisible to security systems designed for traditional infiltrators. Her unique perspective allowed her to see solutions that years of conventional training had never considered. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the senior intelligence advisor, pulled up additional files on her tablet. "The psychological profile on al-Rashid's surrender is particularly interesting. According to debriefing transcripts, he cooperated not because of coercion but because Agent Chen systematically demolished his worldview through factual presentation." Morrison nodded. Sarah approached the interrogation like a chess game rather than a battle. She understood that al-Rashid's strength came from his sense of moral superiority and tactical invincibility. Rather than attacking those beliefs directly, she simply showed him evidence that both were illusions. General Hayes studied the mission timeline. The most remarkable aspect is the speed of cooperation. Most high-value targets require days or weeks of interrogation to yield actionable intelligence. Al-Rashid provided critical details within 30 minutes of first contact. That's because Sarah understood something that conventional interrogation training doesn't address, Morrison explained. People like Al-Rashid aren't motivated by fanatical dedication to abstract principles. They're motivated by the belief that their cause can succeed and their followers are truly committed. When you destroy those beliefs with factual evidence, cooperation becomes the only rational choice. The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah hadn't just completed a successful mission, she had pioneered entirely new approaches to infiltration, interrogation, and psychological operations. Admiral Chen broke the silence. "Commander, where is Agent Chen now? Why isn't she presenting this briefing herself?" Morrison's expression grew somber. "Sir, Agent Chen is currently in Walter Reed Medical Center, recovering from complications related to her original injury. The stress of the mission exacerbated some underlying medical issues." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Even as Sarah had been revolutionizing military operations, she had been pushing her body beyond its sustainable limits. Will she recover?" Dr. Warren asked quietly. "The doctors are optimistic about her long-term prognosis," Morrison replied. "But it's highlighted something important about how we approach the integration of disabled personnel into high-stress operations. We need better medical support systems and more sustainable mission parameters." General Hayes made a note. "What's your recommendation, Commander?" Morrison had been preparing for this question for weeks. "Ma'am, I recommend the immediate establishment of a specialized unit designed around diverse physical capabilities rather than traditional physical standards. Call it the Adaptive Operations Division. Recruit personnel based on cognitive ability, psychological resilience, and specialized skills rather than conventional physical fitness criteria." He activated another slide showing organizational charts. Pair wheelchair-bound infiltration specialists with traditional assault teams. Integrate visually impaired operatives who have enhanced hearing and spatial awareness for reconnaissance missions. Include individuals with prosthetic limbs that can be modified for specialized equipment. Admiral Chen studied the proposal. "You're talking about fundamentally restructuring special operations doctrine." "Yes, sir, I am," Morrison replied without hesitation. "Because our current doctrine is based on assumptions that the Al-Rashid mission proved are outdated. We assume that physical limitation equals operational limitation. We assume that standard physical configuration equals optimal capability." Sarah proved both assumptions wrong. Dr. Warren pulled up comparative statistics. The success rate data is compelling. Traditional infiltration missions of similar complexity have a 63% success rate. Agent Chen achieved 100% mission success with 0 casualties. More importantly, Morrison added, she achieved objectives that weren't even considered possible with traditional approaches. "We've been trying to assault that compound with conventional forces for 8 months. Sarah walked in, completed the mission, and walked out in less than 4 hours. General Hayes leaned back in her chair. "Commander, what you're proposing would require significant changes to recruitment policies, training programs, equipment development, and medical support infrastructure. Are you certain the benefits justify such extensive modifications?" Morrison thought about Sarah, lying in a hospital bed because she had pushed herself beyond human limits to save thousands of lives. He thought about Al-Rashid's network, now completely dismantled because one woman had refused to accept conventional definitions of possible and impossible. "Ma'am, 3 months ago, Hassan al-Rashid commanded a terrorist network that had successfully resisted every conventional military approach for years. His organization had resources, training, and defensive positions that made them effectively untouchable through traditional means. Morrison paused, ensuring he had everyone's complete attention. Today, that network no longer exists. Not because we bombed it out of existence or fought a prolonged campaign of attrition, but because one remarkable woman demonstrated that unconventional problems require unconventional solutions. She didn't overcome her limitations to become effective, she transformed her limitations into a form of effectiveness that conventional thinking couldn't imagine. He activated the final slide, showing a photograph of Sarah in her modified wheelchair, taken the day before the mission. The question isn't whether we can afford to implement these changes. The question is whether we can afford not to. How many other Sarah Chens are out there, excluded from military service because they don't fit conventional physical profiles? How many impossible missions could become possible if we stopped defining capability in traditional terms? The briefing room was quiet except for the soft hum of electronic equipment. Morrison could see the panel members processing the implications of what they had heard. Finally, General Hayes spoke. Commander Morrison, you'll have preliminary approval to develop a pilot program. Small scale initially, perhaps a dozen personnel with diverse capabilities. We'll need detailed protocols for medical support, specialized equipment requirements, and modified training programs. Admiral Chin added, I want quarterly progress reports and comprehensive data on operational effectiveness compared to traditional units. If this approach proves viable, we'll consider broader implementation. Understood, sir, Morrison replied. Thank you for your consideration. As the briefing concluded and the panel members filed out, Dr. Warren approached Morrison privately. Commander, how is Agent Chin really doing? The official reports are professionally encouraging, but I'm asking for your personal assessment. Morrison considered his words carefully. Doctor, Sarah is the strongest person I've ever encountered, but strength has its limits. The mission took everything she had to give, and then some. She's fighting now to recover what the mission cost her. Will she be able to return to active duty? That depends on how we define active duty, Morrison replied. Sarah may never again be capable of extended field operations like the Al-Rashid mission. But her mind, her strategic thinking, her ability to see solutions others miss, those capabilities are intact and more valuable than ever. Dr. Warren nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps the Adaptive Operations Division's first recruit should be its founding architect. That evening, Morrison drove to Walter Reed Medical Center to visit Sarah. She was sitting in her hospital bed, surrounded by intelligence reports and tactical manuals, her laptop balanced on a bedside table. Commander, she greeted him with a smile that didn't quite hide her exhaustion. How did the briefing go? They approved a pilot program, Morrison replied, settling into the visitor's chair. 12 personnel initially, with potential for expansion based on performance metrics. Sarah's expression brightened. That's wonderful news. When do we begin recruitment? Morrison studied her face carefully. Sarah, the doctors say you're going to need months of recovery time before you can consider any kind of operational activity. I know, she replied quietly. The mission, it took more than I expected. But, Commander, this is bigger than my personal recovery. We've proven that military effectiveness isn't about conforming to traditional physical standards. We've shown that diversity of capability leads to diversity of solutions. She gestured to the reports spread across her bed. I've been analyzing similar operations from the past 5 years. Missions that failed because conventional approaches were insufficient. Targets that remain uncaptured because traditional thinking couldn't find viable approaches. With the right team of unconventional operators, half of these could be resolved successfully. Morrison felt the familiar mixture of admiration and concern that Sarah always inspired. Even from a hospital bed, she was thinking strategically about problems others couldn't solve. The division is going to need a commanding officer, he said carefully. Someone who understands both the potential and The limitations of adaptive operations. Sarah met his eyes directly. Are you offering me the position, Commander? I'm saying that nobody else could do it as well as you could. But only when you're ready. Only when the doctors clear you for duty. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out the hospital window at the evening sky. Commander, can I tell you something I learned during the Al-Rashid mission? Morrison nodded. Strength isn't about what your body can do. It's about what your mind refuses to accept as impossible. My body was failing during that infiltration. I knew I was pushing beyond sustainable limits. But my mind refused to accept that thousands of innocent people should die because of conventional thinking about what disabled people could accomplish. She turned back to look at him directly. I'll take the position when I'm medically cleared. Not because I've overcome my limitations, but because I've learned to use them as advantages. And I'll recruit others who have done the same. 6 months later, the Adaptive Operations Division held its first graduation ceremony. 12 operatives with diverse physical configurations had completed the most intensive training program in military history. Wheelchair users who could infiltrate spaces conventional soldiers couldn't access. Visually impaired personnel with enhanced auditory capabilities perfect for reconnaissance. Individuals with prosthetic limbs modified for specialized equipment. Commander Sarah Chen, now fully recovered and, leading the division, watched her team demonstrate capabilities that redefined military effectiveness. They moved through training scenarios with precision and innovation that impressed even veteran special operations observers. Jack Morrison, now serving as Deputy Director of Unconventional Operations, stood beside her at the ceremony. Any regrets about taking this assignment? He asked quietly. Sarah smiled, watching her team execute a complex infiltration scenario that would have been impossible for conventional operators. Commander, 3 years ago I thought my military career was over because I didn't fit traditional definitions of what a soldier should be. Today, I'm leading a division that's proving those definitions were always too narrow. She gestured toward her team. Look at them. Each one was told they couldn't serve because of their physical differences. Now they're demonstrating capabilities that conventional military thinking said were impossible. Morrison nodded, understanding completely. The woman who couldn't walk had walked through every barrier placed in her path, and, in doing so, she had opened pathways for others to follow. What's next for the division? He asked. Sarah's expression grew serious. We've got intelligence on 3 separate operations that conventional approaches haven't been able to resolve. High-value targets, complex infiltration requirements, situations that require unconventional solutions. She paused, watching her team complete their demonstration with flawless precision. It's time to show the world what adaptive operations can really accomplish. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a hospital bed in Afghanistan to the Pentagon briefing room to leading the most innovative military unit in history. Every step had required her to redefine what was possible, both for herself and for others who had been told their differences made them weak. The woman who couldn't walk had learned to fly. And now she was teaching others to soar beyond every limitation they had ever imagined. The future of military operations would be adaptive, innovative, and inclusive. It would be a future where different didn't mean less capable, it meant differently capable, with unique advantages that conventional thinking could never anticipate. It would be a future that Sarah Chen and her extraordinary team were ready to create, one impossible mission at a time.